January 1944, above the skies of Germany. The roar of engines fills the air as a squadron of American B-17 flying fortresses thunders toward their target. A heavily defended munitions factory deep inside enemy territory. Below, the ground trembles with the rumble of war. The air is thick with tension, but it is the sky that holds the true danger. Suddenly, a shadow crosses the sun, a sleek silhouette that cuts through the clouds. The P-51 Mustang, its wings gleaming under the cold, harsh light, escorts the bombers with deadly precision. The German pilots, flying their Messerschmitt Bf 109s, have been laughing at this new Allied design, dismissing it as another nuisance. But as the Mustang surges forward, they are soon forced to reconsider. The German fighters, once the dominant force in the skies, now feel a surge of uncertainty. The Mustang's unmatched speed and agility leave the Messerschmitts struggling to keep pace. One by one, they are left behind, powerless to stop the relentless assault. The Mustang has proven its worth, no longer a joke, but the beginning of a new era in aerial warfare. The Luftwaffe's reign over the skies is slipping, and the Allied pilots, once uncertain of their new weapon, now have something far more dangerous than they ever expected. They have control. By early 1944, the Second World War had reached a crucial tipping point. The tide of battle in the European theater was beginning to turn, but Germany's grip on its occupied territories remained tight. The Allies, however, had steadily gained ground in North Africa and Italy, and now they were planning a full-scale assault on the heart of Nazi Germany. The Allies' strategic bombing campaign was in full swing, with thousands of bombers aimed at crippling Germany's industrial infrastructure. However, the key to success lay in overcoming the powerful Luftwaffe. The German Air Force, whose dominance in the skies had made every mission a perilous undertaking. Throughout 1942 and 1943, the United States Army Air Forces, USAAF, had been hammering German targets with bombing raids, but the losses were staggering. The B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator bombers, powerful and resilient as they were vulnerable to the German interceptors. The Luftwaffe's fighters, especially the Messerschmitt Bf 109 and the Focke-Wulf FW 190, would swoop in from above, tearing through the formations and sending bombers plummeting to the ground. Without adequate protection, the bomber crews faced near-certain death. Enter the P-51 Mustang. Initially designed as a lightweight fighter for Britain's Royal Air Force, RAF, in 1940, the Mustang's potential had quickly become apparent. The aircraft was fast, maneuverable, and capable of operating at high altitudes. But it was its range, or rather the lack of it, that limited its effectiveness. The early versions of the Mustang were good for short-range combat, but Allied bombers needed long-range escorts to protect them as they flew deeper into enemy territory. In 1942, the USAAF had commissioned North American Aviation, NAA, to modify the Mustang, and the result was a game-changer. By fitting the aircraft with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine previously used in the British Spitfire, the Mustang's range was vastly increased. The new P-51 could now accompany bombers all the way from England into the heart of Germany and back, providing critical protection against German interceptors. The new aircraft, sleek and powerful, began to enter service in late 1943, and its performance was remarkable. It could reach speeds of over 400 miles per hour, outpacing nearly every German fighter in the sky. With its superior range, speed, and agility, the P-51 Mustang would go on to become the most important long-range escort fighter of the war, fundamentally altering the balance of air power over Europe. But despite the P-51's potential, there were many who doubted its capabilities, particularly among the German pilots. Early on, the Luftwaffe dismissed the Mustang as another attempt by the Allies to field a fighter that could threaten their superiority. German airmen, who had dominated the skies for years, did not take the new aircraft seriously. They had faced off against slower, less capable Allied fighters in the past, and they assumed the P-51 would be no different. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe was struggling. By 1943, Germany's air forces were stretched thin, with a lack of trained pilots and the increasing strain of Allied bombing campaigns. The German pilots who had once relished the opportunity to engage Allied bombers now found themselves fighting against an ever-increasing number of adversaries. Not only bombers, but also the P-47 Thunderbolt and the P-38 Lightning, both capable and formidable aircraft. The Luftwaffe was beginning to face a new kind of war, one that wasn't just about aerial skill, but also about technological innovation. The turning point for the P-51 Mustang came in late 1943, when the Allies made a strategic decision to equip the bombers with long-range fighter escorts. With the Mustang's extended range and superior firepower, it became the ideal candidate for the job. The USAF, led by figures like General Henry H. Arnold and General Hap Arnold, recognized that the Mustang could be the key to ending Germany's air dominance. But it was not just the Mustang's specifications that made it revolutionary. It was the effect it had on the war itself. In early 1944, the Mustangs began their first missions over Germany, and what was once seen by the Luftwaffe as an untested threat quickly became the most dangerous weapon in the skies. The Luftwaffe, once the pride of the Nazi regime, had started to show signs of strain by the time the P-51 Mustang entered the picture. Throughout the early years of the war, Germany had boasted one of the most effective and efficient air forces in the world. Its fighters, the Messerschmitt Bf 109 and Focke-Wulf Fw 190, were formidable opponents, feared by Allied pilots. But as the war dragged on, Germany's technological advantage began to erode, and the Luftwaffe found itself in a desperate battle to maintain air superiority over Europe. By late 1943, the Luftwaffe had suffered tremendous losses, not only in terms of aircraft but also pilots. The supply of experienced aviators was dwindling, and the demands of the war front stretched the German air forces thinner and thinner. As the Allies pushed deeper into occupied Europe, Germany's defenses grew weaker, and the Luftwaffe was being pulled into an increasingly defensive posture. The arrival of the P-51 Mustang would prove to be the catalyst that marked the beginning of the end for the Luftwaffe's dominance. Initially, German pilots and commanders underestimated the P-51 Mustang. In the early days of its service, many in the Luftwaffe considered it a novelty, a fast but relatively untested fighter. They were already engaged in constant battles with the likes of the P-47 Thunderbolt and the P-38 Lightning, both of which were formidable adversaries. But those aircraft had their limitations, particularly when it came to range and speed. In contrast, the P-51's impressive combination of endurance and firepower posed a far more serious threat, though the Germans failed to grasp this at first. One key factor in the Luftwaffe's initial dismissal of the Mustang was the mindset of many of its pilots, especially the veteran aces. Pilots like General Adolf Galland, one of the Luftwaffe's most decorated commanders, had seen it all. By 1943, Galland had already gained fame as a skilled fighter pilot, and he had witnessed the arrival of new Allied aircraft many times before. He and his colleagues were skeptical of yet another new fighter. But there was one factor they could not ignore: the Mustang's ability to keep up with the bombers, which were now a constant presence over Europe. The introduction of the P-51 Mustang in the role of long-range bomber escort changed the very nature of the war in the skies. For the Germans, it was an unsettling development. The Mustang's speed and range meant that it could engage enemy fighters far from the bombers, preventing German interceptors from reaching their targets. German pilots had become accustomed to attacking Allied bombers from a distance, knowing that their own fighters could outpace any enemy response. But the Mustang was different. The first major encounters between the P-51 Mustang and the Luftwaffe took place in early 1944. The Americans were shocked by how quickly the Mustang proved its worth, while the Germans were caught off guard by its performance. At first, the Luftwaffe pilots treated it with a sense of superiority, believing that it could be quickly outclassed. However, they soon learned that this was no ordinary Allied fighter. One of the key advantages of the P-51 Mustang was its combination of speed and maneuverability. While the Messerschmitt Bf 109 was agile, the Mustang's superior speed allowed it to outpace the German aircraft in almost every scenario. The 109 was already at a disadvantage in terms of range, but with the Mustang able to cover long distances and then outfly the 109s in combat, the Luftwaffe pilots began to feel the pressure. The Mustang's effectiveness as a long-range escort was reinforced during raids over Germany and France. As the Allied bombers approached their targets, the Mustangs swept in to protect them. Time and time again, they found themselves intercepting German fighters long before they could reach the bombers. The German pilots, who had once dismissed the P-51 as an overhyped aircraft, now found themselves facing it in deadly combat. The Mustang's superiority was no longer in question. But the true turning point came when German pilots began to realize the Mustang's ability to fight as well as it could fly. In addition to its speed, the Mustang was highly maneuverable, and it carried 650 caliber machine guns, making it a formidable opponent in dogfights. This combination of attributes made it a terrifying adversary to the Luftwaffe pilots, who were accustomed to fighting Allied aircraft that were either too slow or too poorly armed to pose much of a threat. For many German pilots, the Mustang was a wake-up call. In early 1944, the Luftwaffe had been losing ground in the air war, but it wasn't until they encountered the P-51 that they truly understood the scale of the challenge. They had underestimated the Allies' resolve and technological capabilities, and the P-51 Mustang was the evidence of that. The story of the P-51 Mustang is not just one of technological triumph, it is also the story of the men who flew it. For many Allied pilots, the Mustang was not merely an aircraft, it was a lifeline, the difference between survival and death. These pilots were young men, many of them barely out of their teens, thrust into the chaos of war. As the Mustang roared through the skies, it was the courage and determination of these pilots that would ultimately determine its success in the conflict. For American pilots, flying the P-51 Mustang was an experience unlike any other. The aircraft was a revelation, fast, responsive, and above all, reliable. It was the perfect match for the high-stakes bombing missions over Europe, where the Allies' B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators faced constant threats from German fighters. The Mustang's ability to provide long-range escort for these bombers marked a crucial turning point in the war. Pilots like Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer, who would go on to become a leading ace in the USF, felt an immediate connection with the P-51. Meyer had flown the P-47 Thunderbolt before, but the Mustang's superior speed and maneuverability made it a far more effective aircraft in combat. It felt like the aircraft was part of me, he recalled. The Mustang gave these young men the confidence to take on what seemed like insurmountable odds as they raced across Europe's war-torn skies, defending their comrades in arms. However, the Mustang was not without its risks. As the war raged on, the intensity of aerial combat escalated, and the dangers of long-range escort missions became more apparent. The Allied pilots knew that their survival often hinged on being able to outfly their enemies. The Mustang was fast, but speed alone wasn't always enough. In dogfights, where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death, skill and experience became paramount. For many of the pilots, the psychological toll was immense. The Mustang had become their shield, but it couldn't protect them from the overwhelming odds of war. German pilots, too, faced an evolving dynamic. The P-51 Mustang was not the first Allied fighter they had encountered, but it was the first to present a real, sustained challenge to their superiority. For seasoned Luftwaffe aces like Günter Rahl and Erich Hartmann, who had racked up dozens of kills in their Messerschmitt Bf 109s, The emergence of the Mustang represented a serious threat. Many German pilots had grown accustomed to an easy dominance in the skies, intercepting Allied bombers and wiping out slower Allied fighters with relative ease. But the Mustang changed that dynamic. When these veteran pilots faced the Mustang, they were forced to adjust their tactics. No longer could they simply engage the bombers at will. The P-51 was always there, waiting, a formidable opponent that could quickly turn the tide of battle. Yet, for the German pilots, the psychological blow was just as severe as the physical one. The Mustang's arrival signified the beginning of the end for Luftwaffe's supremacy. German pilots, especially the younger ones, found themselves disillusioned by the speed and precision of the American aircraft. It wasn't just a matter of technology, it was a matter of the Allied resolve. They now knew that their enemies had developed something capable of challenging their dominance. The human toll on both sides of the conflict was immense. As the war continued, pilots on both sides were pushed to their limits. The Mustang's success was not just about technological superiority. It was about the resilience of the men who flew it and the men who fought against it. The Mustang represented hope for the Allies, but it also represented a terrifying new reality for the Luftwaffe. The P-51 Mustang's technological innovation was groundbreaking, particularly when it came to its engine and overall design. Built for speed, endurance, and adaptability, the Mustang was a fighter aircraft that left its predecessors and its enemies behind. At the heart of its success was its Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, a British-designed power plant that transformed the aircraft's performance and gave the Allies a significant edge in the air war. The original P-51 design was solid, but the introduction of the Merlin engine in the later variants, particularly the P-51B and P-51D, turned the aircraft into a game-changing machine. The Merlin engine, a liquid-cooled V-12, was known for its reliability and its ability to generate consistent power at high altitudes. This was particularly crucial for long-range operations, where the Mustang had to fly deep into enemy territory and back. With its new engine, the Mustang could achieve speeds of over 430 miles per hour, making it one of the fastest aircraft in the skies. Another critical feature of the Mustang was its aerodynamic design. The aircraft was built for speed and agility, with a sleek fuselage and a wingspan that allowed for better maneuverability in dogfights. Unlike many of its contemporaries, which sacrificed maneuverability for firepower, the Mustang achieved a perfect balance between the two. Its .650 caliber machine guns packed a punch, and it could outrun almost anything in the air. The P-51's range was perhaps its most remarkable feature. Unlike many other Allied fighters, which were limited to short-range engagements, the Mustang could escort bombers all the way from England to Germany and back. This increased range made the Mustang indispensable to the strategic bombing campaigns over Europe, where the threat from German fighters was always looming. The ability to fly long distances without refueling was a key factor in the Mustang's success, and it marked a significant leap in the capabilities of fighter aircraft. But the Mustang's technological prowess was not just in its engine or its range. It was also in its ability to evolve. As the war went on, the P-51 underwent several modifications, each one improving its capabilities and adaptability. Newer models like the P-51D featured a bubble canopy that provided better visibility for pilots, an important enhancement for dogfighting. The introduction of newer, more powerful armament options and advanced avionics allowed the Mustang to stay one step ahead of the evolving German threat. The P-51 Mustang was not just an aircraft. It was a symbol of technological innovation in wartime. It was a result of the combined efforts of engineers, designers, and pilots who had worked tirelessly to create the perfect long-range escort fighter. The result was an aircraft that could outperform its enemies in almost every way, changing the course of the air war in Europe. The story of the P-51 Mustang is also one of leadership and strategic vision. The decision to invest in long-range fighter escorts was driven by the Allied leadership's recognition that the war in Europe could not be won solely by bombing runs. To break the Luftwaffe's dominance in the skies, new tactics had to be employed, and the P-51 Mustang was the cornerstone of this shift. One of the most pivotal figures in this transformation was General H. Hap Arnold, commander of the United States Army Air Forces, USAF. Arnold understood that the success of the Allied bombing campaigns depended on gaining control of the skies over Europe. He pushed for a fighter that could accompany bombers on long-range missions, protecting them from German interceptors as they flew deep into enemy territory. Arnold's foresight in supporting the development of the P-51 Mustang laid the foundation for what would become the turning point of the air war. The strategic vision that led to the P-51's creation was aligned with a broader shift in Allied air strategy. For much of the early years of the war, the focus had been on strategic bombing, with little thought given to protecting the bombers from enemy fighters. The USAF's bomber crews were suffering tremendous losses as German interceptors tore through their formations. It was a brutal cycle that needed to be broken, and the leadership at the top recognized that to achieve victory, a comprehensive solution was needed. Long-range escorts. The decision to equip the bombers with long-range fighters was a significant departure from previous tactics. Early in the war, bombers were expected to fend for themselves, and their escorts were generally limited to short-range fighters like the P-47 Thunderbolt. While the P-47 had a strong reputation for its firepower, it lacked the range to stay with the bombers on deep penetration missions over Germany. The introduction of the P-51 Mustang allowed the Allies to shift their approach, ensuring that the bombers had constant protection from the moment they took off until they returned to base. On the German side, the leadership of the Luftwaffe was slow to recognize the significance of the P-51. Figures like General Adolf Galland, who had been an ace during the Battle of Britain and was one of the leading voices of the Luftwaffe, underestimated the capabilities of the Mustang. Galland, a decorated and highly respected figure, had grown accustomed to the superiority of the Bf 109 and FW 190. To him, the appearance of the Mustang seemed like just another Allied aircraft that would soon fade into obscurity. However, as the Mustang began to dominate the skies over Europe, it became clear that this was no ordinary fighter. The German leadership's delay in responding to the threat posed by the P-51 was a critical mistake. Galland and his fellow officers had misjudged the Allies' technological progress and had failed to account for the fundamental shift in air warfare brought about by the Mustang. By the time the Luftwaffe began to adapt their tactics and focus on countering the Mustang, it was already too late. The P-51 had already altered the balance of power in the air. The leadership of both sides played a crucial role in the Mustang's success. For the Allies, the strategic decision to prioritize long-range fighter escorts shifted the course of the war. For the Germans, their leadership's underestimation of the Mustang's potential allowed the Allies to gain a significant edge. This tactical miscalculation was part of a broader pattern of overconfidence within the Luftwaffe, which ultimately led to its downfall in the skies over Europe. For the Luftwaffe pilots, the introduction of the P-51 Mustang was a rude awakening. German pilots had long held the belief that the Allies were incapable of matching the performance of their top-tier fighters. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 and the Focke-Wulf FW 190. The presence of the Mustang in the skies over Europe shattered that perception, marking the beginning of a new chapter in aerial combat. The Mustang was unlike any Allied fighter the Germans had faced before. While earlier American aircraft were often slow or had limited range, the Mustang's combination of speed, maneuverability, and range made it a formidable opponent. German pilots, particularly those who had been accustomed to the Bf 109, found themselves facing an aircraft that could outmatch them in every way. The Mustang's superior speed meant that it could engage German fighters from long distances, disrupting their attacks on Allied bombers before they even got close. One of the most significant shocks to German pilots was the Mustang's ability to pursue and outmaneuver the Bf-109 in dogfights. The Bf-109 had been the Luftwaffe's most successful fighter, capable of both offensive and defensive operations. But in the presence of the Mustang, the 109's advantages were nullified. The P-51 was faster, and its superior range allowed it to be a constant threat to German interceptors. German pilots who once easily dominated the skies now found themselves in the awkward position of constantly being hunted. This change in air tactics had a profound impact on the morale of the Luftwaffe pilots. For many, the Mustang was a symbol of everything that was going wrong for the Germans. It represented a shift in the tide of war, one that they could no longer control. As the number of Mustang-equipped squadrons grew, the Luftwaffe's ability to contest air superiority weakened. German pilots were no longer able to engage with the same sense of confidence that had once defined their tactics. The Mustang's presence forced the Luftwaffe to adapt quickly, but the Germans were fighting a losing battle. Their fighters, like the Bf-109, were unable to keep pace with the new Allied threat, and their aerial tactics began to falter. The P-51 had outclassed them in ways they had never expected, and the once dominant Luftwaffe was forced to reckon with a new reality. The decisive moment for the P-51 Mustang came during the winter and spring of 1944. By this time, the Allies had ramped up their strategic bombing campaigns, and the need for long-range fighter escorts had become paramount. As the Mustang made its first appearances over the skies of Europe, the Luftwaffe found itself unprepared for the onslaught of a fighter that could match, and often exceed, the capabilities of its best aircraft. The first major encounters between the P-51 Mustang and the German fighters occurred during daylight bombing raids over Germany. These raids, part of the Allied campaign to cripple Nazi industrial production, were some of the most daring and dangerous of the war. The Luftwaffe had long dominated the skies during these operations, with their Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s sweeping down on the bombers, picking them off one by one. But when the Mustangs entered the fray, the tide began to turn. In early 1944, during raids like the one on the German ball-bearing factories in Schweinfurt, the P-51s were introduced to protect the bombers from German interceptors. The initial shock came as German pilots found themselves outmatched not just in speed, but in tactics. The Mustang, armed with 6 50-caliber machine guns, proved devastating in dogfights. The Luftwaffe's pilots, who had once laughed off the new Allied aircraft, now found themselves facing a fighter that could engage at long distances, evade their attacks, and, most importantly, outpace their Messerschmitts. German aces, like Major Erich Hartmann, the most successful fighter pilot of all time, found themselves unable to sustain the advantage they once held. While Hartmann had racked up an impressive tally of kills, he was now confronted with an adversary he had never encountered before. The P-51's superior range meant that it could follow him home from a mission, intercepting the Bf-109s before they even reached the bombers. One of the most notable engagements was the Battle of the Luftwaffe's Last Stand. Over the skies of Germany in the spring of 1944, the Allies launched a series of missions to destroy the German aircraft production facilities, and the P-51s played a critical role. For the first time in the war, the Luftwaffe was forced into a defensive position, and their fighters were simply outclassed by the Mustang's speed and endurance. German pilots who had once dominated the skies now found themselves on the back foot, unable to respond effectively to the new threat. As the Mustang continued to escort bombers across Europe, the impact was undeniable. The Luftwaffe's ability to mount a sustained defense was broken. The skies, once their domain, were now contested by an enemy they could not easily repel. For the German pilots who had once scoffed at the Mustang, the realization was sudden and brutal. The Allies had developed a fighter that could not only defend the bombers but also engage them in direct combat and win. The first encounters between the P-51 and the Luftwaffe marked the beginning of a dramatic shift in the air war. What had been a contest for dominance in the skies now became an exercise in survival for the German fighters. The balance of power had shifted, and the Luftwaffe was on the defensive. The psychological impact of the P-51 Mustang on the Luftwaffe was as profound as its tactical effectiveness. In the months following the initial engagements, the Luftwaffe pilots began to lose their confidence. The Mustang's unmatched speed and range gave the Allies an unshakable foothold in the air. What had been a relatively even contest between the Luftwaffe and Allied forces was now skewed in favor of the P-51, and the Germans could do little to counter it. One of the most decisive moments came on March 6, 1944, during Operation Argument, also known as Big Week. This operation involved a series of mass bombing raids aimed at German aircraft production, and the P-51s played a crucial role. They not only escorted the bombers, but also engaged in direct combat with the German interceptors, taking down countless Luftwaffe aircraft. For the German pilots, the battle was a shock. No longer were they fighting a scattered, disorganized Allied air force. They were facing a force that had learned how to coordinate their air assets, led by an aircraft that could fight, protect, and engage with deadly precision. The P-51 Mustang's success in these battles shattered the morale of the Luftwaffe's pilots. The constant presence of the American fighters in the sky, the inability to defeat them in combat, and the increasing number of Allied aircraft attacking German targets created a sense of hopelessness. For veteran pilots like Galland, the Mustang represented the realization that their superiority in the air had been lost. As the P-51s continued to hunt down German aircraft, the Luftwaffe began to change its tactics. The once feared German aces, who had prided themselves on their superior dogfighting skills, now found themselves on the retreat. The Mustang's ability to engage at long ranges, coupled with its formidable armament, made it impossible for German fighters to mount a sustained counterattack. In one particular encounter, a squadron of P-51s intercepted a group of Bf-109s trying to attack a bomber formation. The result was devastating. The Mustang pilots, using their superior speed and firepower, tore through the German formation. Within minutes, the Bf-109s were in full retreat, and the bombers continued their mission unhindered. This was the turning point, the moment when the Luftwaffe knew that the tide of the war had shifted irrevocably. The once proud air force that had dominated the skies was now forced to retreat, and the Allies, armed with the P-51 Mustang, had claimed the skies over Europe. The impact of the P-51 Mustang on the Luftwaffe was nothing short of devastating. By the spring of 1944, German air superiority was a thing of the past. Once, the Luftwaffe had ruled the skies over Europe, but now they were fighting an increasingly desperate defensive battle. The arrival of the P-51 Mustang had fundamentally altered the air war, and the Allies had begun to dominate in ways that were previously unimaginable. The Mustang's combination of long-range endurance, speed, and firepower was a nightmare for German pilots. Their Bf-109s and FW-190s, although formidable in their own right, were no match for the Mustang's superior performance. The Luftwaffe's once feared aces, such as Günter Rall and Erich Hartmann, found themselves at a disadvantage. These pilots had built their reputations on being able to outmaneuver and outgun Allied fighters. But the P-51's superior speed and range made that impossible. The Mustang's ability to fly with the bombers and strike at German interceptors before they could even reach their targets had shattered the Luftwaffe's ability to disrupt Allied missions. German morale took a heavy blow. As more and more P-51s arrived in Europe and began to escort Allied bombers deeper into enemy territory, the Luftwaffe found itself struggling to mount a credible defense. The myth of their superiority in the air, once a cornerstone of Nazi propaganda, had been shattered. The Luftwaffe's pilots, already stretched thin and losing experienced airmen at a rapid rate, could not keep up with the wave of new Allied aircraft. German fighter production was no longer sufficient to replace the losses, and the once proud Air Force found itself unable to respond effectively to the growing threat from the Allies. The situation was dire. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe had lost its ability to control the skies over Europe. The Allies, on the other hand, gained the upper hand, which allowed them to launch ever more daring bombing raids with fewer losses. The strategic bombing campaign, which had once been limited by the Luftwaffe's ability to intercept bombers, now saw a massive increase in effectiveness. The P-51 Mustang played a central role in this success, ensuring the safety of Allied bombers as they carried out their vital missions. With the Luftwaffe on the defensive, the Allies could now focus their efforts on systematically dismantling Germany's industrial capacity. The bombers, protected by Mustangs, could reach deep into Germany's heartland and strike at the core of its war machine. Factories, transportation hubs, and fuel depots that once produced the tools of Nazi warfare were destroyed or crippled by the relentless bombing runs, and the P-51 Mustang had played a vital role in ensuring that these missions could be carried out with less interference from enemy fighters. The devastation of the Luftwaffe was not just a loss of military hardware. It was a blow to the spirit of the German people and their leadership. As the war dragged on, and Germany's ability to defend itself from the air diminished, the Reich's ability to mount an effective defense against the Allied forces waned. The loss of air superiority meant that the Germans were now at a significant disadvantage, and the inevitable collapse of their war effort was set in motion. The introduction of the P-51 Mustang marked a turning point in the broader strategic landscape of World War II. Battle with the Luftwaffe on the retreat and Allied bombers no longer facing the same level of risk. The balance of power in Europe had begun to tilt firmly in favor of the Allies. The Mustang's ability to escort bombers all the way into the heart of Germany and protect them from German interceptors made it the most effective long-range fighter of the war. It was the key to the success of the Allied bombing campaign and was critical to the eventual defeat of Nazi Germany. The psychological impact of the Mustang's arrival cannot be overstated. For the Allies, it was a symbol of hope, a clear sign that victory was within reach. The Mustang's dominance in the air boosted the morale of the American and British forces, who had long struggled against the superior Luftwaffe. For the German forces, the Mustang was a harbinger of defeat, a weapon that exposed the weaknesses of their own air forces. It was a constant reminder that the Allies had gained the upper hand in the war. As the Luftwaffe crumbled, the Allies were able to execute their strategy with increasing confidence. The bombing raids continued, and German cities and factories began to crumble under the weight of Allied air superiority. The P-51 Mustang ensured that the Germans could no longer mount a meaningful defense, and the loss of industrial production further crippled the Nazi war effort. The strategic bombing campaigns, once fraught with risk, became increasingly successful as the Luftwaffe's ability to intercept bombers diminished. The effects of the Mustang's introduction were not confined to the skies. The growing success of Allied bombers had a ripple effect on the broader war strategy. As Germany's industrial capabilities were systematically destroyed, the Nazis found it increasingly difficult to continue producing the weapons and supplies needed for their military operations. With no air cover to protect their cities, transportation lines, or military installations, Germany's ability to wage war was significantly reduced. The P-51 Mustang was not just a technological triumph, it was a symbol of the shifting tide of the war. Its success allowed the Allies to take the fight directly to the heart of Nazi Germany, paving the way for the eventual Allied victory in Europe. By the time the war ended in May 1945, the P-51 Mustang had proven itself to be one of the most decisive weapons in the Allied arsenal. The legacy of the P-51 Mustang extends far beyond the battlefield. Its impact on World War II was undeniable, but its influence on the future of aviation and warfare resonates to this day. The Mustang was more than just an aircraft. It was a symbol of technological innovation, strategic vision, and human determination. The aircraft's ability to change the course of a war highlights how one piece of engineering, perfectly designed for a specific purpose, can alter the trajectory of history. In the skies over Europe, the Mustang represented more than just speed and firepower. For the Allied pilots who flew it, it was a symbol of hope and survival, a lifeline in the most dangerous of missions. For the Luftwaffe, it was a rude awakening, a reminder that technological superiority could be fleeting. The German pilots, who once ruled the skies, were forced to reckon with a new reality. They had underestimated the Allies, and the P-51 Mustang was proof that the Allies were no longer playing catch-up. They had, in fact, gained the upper hand. The Mustang's success did not just mark a shift in air warfare. It also signified a change in the psychological and strategic landscape of the war. The Allies had learned from their past mistakes and had embraced the need for long-range escort fighters to protect their bombers. The P-51 Mustang became the cornerstone of this strategy, ensuring that the bombing raids could continue without facing the overwhelming threat posed by the Luftwaffe. It was a new era of air combat, one where the skies were no longer dominated by German fighters, but by the relentless determination of the Allied forces. In the grand sweep of history, the Mustang was a pivotal moment in the larger conflict of World War II. It shifted the momentum of the war in the skies, giving the Allies an undeniable advantage. But the Mustang story is not just about technology or combat. It's about the men who flew it and the men who fought against it. It's about the resilience and courage shown in the face of overwhelming odds. It's about how the ingenuity of a few engineers, combined with the bravery of countless pilots, changed the course of history. The P-51 Mustang's legacy is a reminder that, in warfare, technology and human spirit are often inseparable. The Mustang's creation and its decisive role in the downfall of the Luftwaffe show that victory does not always come from sheer firepower, but from the relentless pursuit of innovation and the willingness to face seemingly insurmountable challenges. Its story is one of resilience, of not accepting defeat when the odds are stacked against you, an enduring lesson in the power of determination, both technological and human.